Hello, my name is Charles and I'm here to give you a brief introduction on ancient Egypt, its famous structures, artifacts, and their culture. So let's start with the Great Sphinx of Giza, commonly referred to as the Sphinx, which is a limestone statue of a reclining sphinx, a mythical creature with a lion's body and a human head that stands on the Giza Plateau on the west bank of the Nile River in Giza. The pyramids at Giza are ancient pyramid-shaped masonry structures and perhaps the most well-known structures in Egypt. Back then, most were built as tombs for the country's pharaohs. Now, we're entering one of the pyramids to explore the various artifacts that are well-known and shows parts of their culture. What we're looking at right now is an Egyptian cobra. The Egyptian cobra was represented in Egyptian mythology by the cobra-headed goddess Mertzeger. A stylized Egyptian cobra was the symbol of sovereignty for the pharaohs who incorporated it into their diadem. Look at these intricate carvings on the wall. These are called Egyptian hieroglyphs. They were a formal writing system used by the ancient Egyptians. Hanging on the wall are the famed canopic jars, used by the ancient Egyptians during the mummification process to store and preserve the viscera of their owner for the afterlife. The jars were 4 in number, each for the safekeeping of particular human organs. We have the stomach, intestines, lungs, and liver, all of which it was believed would be needed in the afterlife. The jackal-headed jar contained the stomach, the baboon-headed jar contained the lungs, the human-headed jar contained the liver, and the falcon-headed jar was for the intestines. The rightmost canopic jar here is only for display and is not included in the original 4 jars. This statue is an Anubis, a jackal-headed god associated with mummification and the afterlife in ancient Egyptian religion. Lastly, we have a sarcophagus. A sarcophagus is a funeral receptacle or a corpse, most commonly carved or cut from stone. Sarcophagi are most often designed to remain above ground, hence were often ornately carved like this one, decorated or elaborately constructed. In ancient Egypt, a sarcophagus formed the external layer of protection for a royal mummy, with several layers of coffins nested within. And there you have it, a brief overview of Egyptian history and culture.
Obscured by murky water for more than 1,500 years, the remains of the ancient capital of the Ptolemies have been found in Egypt's port of Alexandria. Paved roads, jetties, columns, sphinxes, and aphora litter 1/2 square mile of seabed within the eastern portion of the harbor. Among the remnants found by French businessman turned archaeologist Frank Godiot and the French-Egyptian team is a small paved area they believe to be the island of Atirhodos. According to the description of Alexandria by the Greek geographer Strabo, the island was the site of Cleopatra's palace. The remains of the ancient city closest to shore reveal both Greek and Roman remains, says Godiot. However, those found on the island appear to be solely Ptolemaic, suggesting that the palace was abandoned shortly after Cleopatra's suicide in 31 BC. The rest of the city seems to have remained in use until it was leveled by an earthquake.
A sphinx is a mythological creature from the Mediterranean and Middle East with the body of a lion and the head of a person, ram, or hawk. The most famous depiction of a sphinx is probably the Great Sphinx of Giza in Egypt, and when the people talk about the sphinx, this is usually the sphinx they are thinking of. In Egypt, sphinxes were built along the walkways leading to temple complexes and depicted in artwork in positions which suggested that they were meant to guard. The Egyptian name for the sphinx has been lost to history. The word sphinx comes from a Greek word which means to strangle, a reference to the Greek version of the sphinx.
In the springtime of 51 BC, Ptolemy died and left his kingdom in his will to his 18-year-old daughter, Cleopatra. According to Egyptian law, Cleopatra was forced to have a consort who was either a brother or a son, no matter what age, throughout her reign. She was married to her younger brother, Ptolemy XIII, when he was 12. However, she soon dropped his name from any official documents, regardless of the Ptolemaic insistence that the male presence be first among co-rulers. She also had her own portrait and name on coins of that time, ignoring her brothers. When Cleopatra became co-regent, her world was crumbling down around her. Cyprus, Coel, Syria, and Cyrenaica were gone. There was anarchy abroad and famine at home. Cleopatra was a strong-willed Macedonian queen who was brilliant and dreamed of a greater world empire. She almost achieved it. Whether her way of getting it done was for her own desires or for the pursuit of power will never be known for certain.
The Ptolemies engaged in some unorthodox acquisition methods. Some stories relate that they confiscated any book not already in the library from passengers arriving in Alexandria. Another story tells how Ptolemy deceived Athenian authorities when they let him borrow original manuscripts of Asclepius, Sophocles, and Euripides, using silver as collateral. Ptolemy kept the originals and sent the copies back, letting the authorities keep the silver. More traditional means included book purchases from the markets of Athens, Rhodes, and other Mediterranean cities. Older copies were favored acquisitions, the older the better, since they would be considered more trustworthy. At its height, the library held nearly 750,000 scrolls. There must have been duplicates since there weren't that many works.
The wealthy lived in palaces or villas. The general population lived in row houses built of sun-dried mud bricks. Huts were made of reeds with inward sloping, batter balls and thick bases to resist the annual Nile inundation. Evidence for what ordinary houses were like in ancient Egypt is gotten by looking at model houses that have been found buried in tombs and by surviving Egyptian houses built in the traditional way. Both were constructed of bricks, shaped in a wooden mold, made of chopped straw mixed with sun-dried mud from the Nile banks covered over with a thin layer of plaster. Both were built to a simple square design with a flat roof, sometimes topped by a terrace where the inhabitants could sit and enjoy the cool, fresh evening air. Inside the rooms were small and dark, with narrow windows and low ceilings. Some houses had 2 stories, others were all on one level. Many had cellars for storage, dug into the rough ground underneath. Most people lived in villages, clustered along the banks of the river Nile. Village houses were built close together for strength and security. The villages were surrounded by ditches and fields. Nearby was the bleak, endless desert. For the Egyptians, this was the home of the dead.
The ancient sources, particularly the Roman ones, are in general agreement that Cleopatra killed herself by inducing an Egyptian cobra to bite her. The oldest source is Strabo, who was alive at the time of the event, and might even have been in Alexandria. He says that there are 2 stories, that she applied a toxic ointment, or that she was bitten by an asp on her breast. Several Roman poets, writing within 10 years of the event, all mention bites by 2 asps. Other authors have questioned these historical accounts, stating that it is possible that Augustus had killed her.